Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don, and I am a digital marketer in life sciences. And as we get started with our episode today, let me bring in my guest, Leeland Ekstrom. Leeland is the CEO and co-founder of Nashville Biosciences. I keep sort of going back between this, Leeland, as well, because it says NashBio on my script as well. And he's from Vanderbilt University Medical Center, where he studied and making complex healthcare data accessible and valuable for life sciences companies. So with that, welcome.
Thanks, Don. It's funny you tripped up there on the name. We hired a CMO a couple years ago, and that was the first thing he did was shorten the name down to NashBio. It's a lot of syllables in the full name, but that is still the official name of the company, Nashville Biosciences.
Well, it was funny because I didn't know it until I started doing research for the episode, and then I was like, it makes sense. But at the same time, I just didn't know that until I started the process. So, would you mind just starting a little bit with sharing a little bit about yourself and what led you to life sciences overall, and what made you want to move into the intersection of life sciences, genomics, and healthcare data?
Sure, happy to give a bit of background about myself. I grew up in Canada, just outside the Toronto area. Studied engineering in college, and mixed that with a life sciences or a second degree in the life sciences at my undergraduate program. And it was really a desire to, or I guess maybe an uncertainty of whether I wanted to pursue medicine or stay in the more hardcore sciences. And the solution to that problem was a grad school program I ended up taking at MIT. It was called Health Science and Technology, which was exactly that. It was a fusion of engineering and some of the more hardcore sciences with life science applications. So I spent about 5.5 years at MIT, active in neuroscience research, particularly functional brain imaging, which made great use of my background in engineering physics, and then obviously a very, very real life science application in that regard. When I got to the end of that program, however, I guess I struggled a bit with how the pace of research that I was conducting and what impact was I actually able to have over the course of that period of time. And I suspect not an uncommon thought for a lot of folks in PhD research. Loved the technical challenge of the work that we did, but in terms of real output that came from it, it was hard to see how it was going to have impact immediately. It was going to be a much longer term thing. And so that's coming from that background, got connected into management consulting as my next stop coming out of grad school. Got introduced to that through friends I'd made in grad school who were involved in things like I was the president of the graduate student government at MIT for a year. And that's where I kind of became aware of some of those opportunities and did a bit of investigating and decided that joining McKinsey would be quite an interesting and career expanding opportunity as opposed to staying on the academic side and going into a postdoc. And that was the original plan, was kind of the academic route. So I spent about 6 years at McKinsey, first in the Boston area, then out in the Bay Area, and then last tour of duty was in the Denver office, focusing on a range of topics within pharmaceuticals. That's really where I got my education in the practical life sciences, and particularly in the pharmaceutical space. Consulted at a wide range of topics, but particularly towards the end of my tenure at McKinsey, got plugged in with a group of people actively working on topics like genomics and precision medicine and how that can impact things like drug R&D. And so that was the kind of the basis for my next launch point, which was getting connected to Vanderbilt Medical Center in Nashville, and ultimately helping to develop a business plan and then launching a company that has become NashBio. And so in a lot of ways, it's a culmination of each one of those different steps. Obviously, the deep scientific and technical education kind of at the forefront of innovation through graduate school, but then that real focus on impact and moving quickly and making a difference in things, which came from my consulting period. But then the benefit of the NashBio experience is moving a little bit back towards that scientific and technical basis that we've. So I get a bit of the best of both worlds from the scientific education and the business education I picked up at McKinsey.
I'm starting to tie some of the pieces together now. So, because I kept trying to figure out, I mean, you're in Colorado, and how did you come up with NashBio? But so it's your Vanderbilt tie that more or less brings that about. Do you feel like any of your McKinsey experience or other experience outside really helped to shape your current focus?
Um, certainly, certainly some of the things you pick up in a consulting environment, and particularly how to look at a big complex problem, break it down, and in a lot of ways that's what a PhD is as well, right? That's I think why some of the big consulting firms have taken to recruiting from PhD workforces. It's can you look at a big complicated problem, break it down into meaningful or tractable pieces, and then work in a systematic fashion to tackle those pieces. Obviously, a 5-year PhD and maybe a 3-month consulting engagement are two quite different things. And some of the stuff that comes on the consulting side about prioritization of resources and like, yes, we could learn this to the third decimal place, but do we really need to learn it to the third decimal place to make a decision and ultimately make something happen? Those are some of the, I guess, tempering or seasonings that come about stacking those two things together. Also, just dealing with uncertainty in general, I think, is another key part of the consulting education that adds on. That, as I say, we don't need to know everything. We can be comfortable in uncertainty, and kind of knowing when you know enough to make a decision is a key part of the McKinsey education.
Yeah. And I mean, I for sure I've seen some of the frameworks around, just working through more complex problems and things like that from as an outsider.
Yeah,
Certainly haven't experienced them as an insider, though, but I would imagine it comes in handy.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so NashBio operates as a for-profit subsidiary of Vanderbilt University Medical Center with a mission to make complex healthcare data easy to use. Could you explain how NashBio leverages Vanderbilt's unique resources to advance drugs and diagnostics development?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and it's when I started this whole journey, whether it was at the start of McKinsey or even the start of getting NashBio off the ground, I certainly could not have envisioned kind of all that would come about. The story really does start. It's about 20 years ago. Some of the folks at Vanderbilt Medical Center who are still active there now. Shortly after the Human Genome Project was first completed, they got the idea of combining genetic data. At that time, it was genotype data, kind of very early or very sparse genetic data, with clinical phenotype data derived from electronic health record. And so they built a framework for doing exactly that within the construct of a healthcare system. How do you collect data out of an electronic health record? They were an early adopter of that kind of tool. This was in the mid aughts, I guess, is the time point. And EHRs were still a relatively new installation. They'd had one running since 2000, so they had a bit of a head start in that regard. But then building up, how do you combine that with biospecimens and biosamples collected through the provision of clinical care? And so they built this just tremendous research resource that really was useful in a wide range of applications in life sciences, but really at its root trying to understand how genes and genetics impact disease and how they can manifest over time, and having those deep layers of information out of the health record, allowing for all kinds of interesting studies. My part of the story starts about 10 years after they got that resource up and running, and really it was coming from a market perspective in terms of they'd received a number of inbound queries from outside entities, whether it was pharmaceutical or diagnostics, but life sciences companies who were familiar with the resource from publications that had been facilitated at Vanderbilt, and questions about how could we make use of that resource in our own research applications. And so that was kind of the core problem NashBio was created to facilitate, that moving it away from sponsored research applications or filling in the gaps where kind of traditional sponsored research isn't the right vehicle. Build a business in front of it. Put the appropriate people and the appropriate incentives in place to do that. Going to give us general direction in terms of figure out how to use this data responsibly, but don't presuppose what exactly those use cases are, and then let us go. And so solving some of the problems early on that had made it difficult on the academic side, things like how do you run a business development organization in this area? How do you explain what these data are good for, and like not just assuming that people are going to get it on surface what these types of data are useful for, but actually building up a library of case studies and focusing on solutions and helping illustrate how that can be done. Simple stuff like contracting and making it much more nimble than kind of too large. If you got a large pharma company and a large academic institution kind of trying to contract with each other, that can be a slow and cumbersome process. And so that's where some of the business aspects come in, that we're able to act in much more nimble fashion. And then third part being just the customer orientation that comes. I really attribute that to the McKinsey training, McKinsey Time Point, making sure that whatever you produce in that setting, that the customer is going to be able to benefit from. And so bringing all those themes together were sort of the core pieces of founding and launching NashBio. We started initially with a focus on the use of statistical genetics techniques for drug repurposing applications. Some of our colleagues and collaborators at Vanderbilt had done a lot of work in that area, particularly with respect to generic drugs. And the first area we explored was moving that over into more novel therapeutics. Can use it to prioritize portfolios, can use it to identify indication expansion opportunities. Can you try and pick out potential safety signals? And then over time, I think as any good startup would attest to, just listening to the market and kind of expanding the use cases out as we would explain ourselves. And that was often one of those still is one of our questions. But in those early days, if you had this resource, what else? Here's what we thought of, but what else would you do with it? And so that's over time how we've built up the library of things that we're able to do and expand what we're able to offer. I guess the other transition that we've gone through in those early days, we were heavily focused on a services model. And so somebody would come to us and ask a question, we'd deploy a services team. And again, I attribute a lot of this to my McKinsey background, that every problem can be solved with a team of a project manager and a team of two consultants. Is kind of the historical stereotype of McKinsey. And so we adopted a lot of those practices in the early days of NashBio. But as we've grown and matured, we've gone through several different iterations and now leading more with a technology-focused offering as opposed to a pure services offering.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great lead in for my next question. So the BioView appears to be one of your cornerstone assets for NashBio. How do you use the vast biobank and linking genomic data with real world clinical records to
Yeah.
accelerate innovation in biopharma and diagnostics?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to some of the founding pieces I mentioned in the original story. I mean, at its root, we're trying to understand how genes, the molecular makeup of each participant in the BioView resource, how that ultimately manifests in terms of the phenotype or the disease and response to therapy and things like that they ultimately demonstrate in day-to-day care. In terms of what does that practically mean? So we've worked with more than 75 different biotechs and pharmaceutical organizations over our history, wide range of problems. We do tend to focus a lot in early stage activities. So early stage drug discovery, trying to help characterize or discover new drug targets or characterize those drug targets, using those clinical phenotype elements to build up different disease cases and control definitions, and running various statistical studies on top of that to identify new drug hypotheses. You can work through different target characterization activities as well. And what that means basically is when somebody's got an idea for a new drug, can you figure out, as I said earlier, things like indication expansion or potential safety risks? And then starting to move down the pipeline of R&D activities, can you start to understand different stratifications of patients? Are there markers, biomarkers, or genetic signatures that may indicate response or progression of disease, things like that? And that's where particularly a resource like this that's longitudinal and has these really deep clinical phenotype layers, you're able to start to build some very elegant sorts of studies in that regard to try and answer those types of questions. We've certainly done work in the clinical development space. We're not a clinical trial resource per se, but we can certainly help design clinical trial protocols. We've done synthetic control arm work as well, which is to take the clinical data from the health record and match that up to a single arm study as a way to provide some degree of control or comparator arm in silico fashion. And then at the far end of the spectrum, we do a lot of work in health economics and outcomes research, trying to understand things like patient journeys and how care pathways change. That doesn't involve the genetic data so much. That tends to rely just on the clinical data layers. The genetics tends to sit in the early stage questions, but again, the same differentiators or the same features in terms of that depth of clinical information, being able to connect all these points together are what the resource is used for in those later use cases.
So let's talk a little bit about your collaboration activities as well. I saw that you work with Datavant and also the Alliance for Genomic Discovery. How do the collaborations that you have enhance your capabilities?
Yeah, so I'll break those in half and maybe tackle the AGD first, and then we can come back to the technical capabilities and partnership opportunities. The Alliance for Genomic Discovery was an initiative that we launched about 2.5 years ago in partnership with Illumina and a number of large pharmaceutical companies. In simple terms, the goal was to whole genome sequence as much of the biobank that we were able to access from Vanderbilt. And really, that was to build a much deeper genetic layer of data to power through a number of those use cases. For those not kind of familiar or deeply familiar with different genetic profiling technologies, genotyping is one of the historical technologies. It's very much a point sampling, looking at specific spots in the genome. Whole exome is then moving to all the exomes, or the kind of the protein coding parts of the human genome, and then whole genome sequencing is exactly that, reading the whole genome out, both the regulatory, or the coding regions, as well as the regulatory, and all the regions that we don't particularly understand all that well. And so we brought the AGD together as a vehicle to execute the sequencing of that biobank, and working with those partners to ultimately power their drug discovery and R&D activities afterwards. So they funded the sequencing of the biobank. 250,000 whole genomes is what we were able to generate over the course of about 2 years of time. So to date, it's one of the largest generations, and certainly one of the fastest generations of that scale of data. We're talking petabytes of whole genome sequencing here, and then all that clinical data on top to provide context and help create all kinds of studies. And so the purpose was really to accomplish something that any individual partner, and certainly us, NashBio ourselves, would not have been able to accomplish. There's been a few of these consortia transactions over the past probably 6 or 7 years now, and really it's that leverage factor that science at that scale is quite expensive, and no single company is going to be able to accomplish all that. But bringing the power together of multiple organizations that share that goal, we were able to accomplish something it's really just a starting point now, because now all those partners are going to make use of that data in their R&D activities. And so we're excited to see what comes about from that, and then actively discussing with them about ways we could further extend this. Do we sequence additional samples? Do we look at other omics layers that we could add on to this data set? And so those are active areas of expansion we're trying to work through. The other activity, or the other set of collaborations you mentioned, referencing Datavant in particular, are really capability extenders. And certainly as a small company, we can't build everything. Our head of corp dev is quite adamant about that we need to take a fairly rigorous approach to things like a buy build partner sort of analysis. And so that's where those type of partnerships come about, that we identify a clear need within the company for a particular piece of technology or a particular solution. And yes, if our engineering team can build it and it's cost effective, we can do that, or it's some critical piece of capability that we absolutely need to own in-house, we will do that. But if not, is it something we can buy off the shelf? And maybe it's even if it's critical, but we can get there a whole lot faster with buying it or partnering it. It certainly makes the case. So we really look at it as a way to add capabilities to NashBio, and I'd say that's as the company's matured, that's getting better at that has been a key piece of that. That early on, especially in the early days when you don't have a lot of resources in an early stage company, there is a real focus or priority into we'll just build it. We'll just kind of brute force or bootstrap our way through it. And as I've seen kind of multiple cycles of that over the history of NashBio, there's definitely times where buying or partnering is has a much better ROI than you would have thought initially.
It's a very critical thing, I would say, to point out to anybody as well that's in a company, let's say, where you're building everything. I mean, it also means that you're maintaining everything. You've
Yep.
got to you kind of live the full life cycle of creation all the way through use and then maintenance. And I think there's a lot of companies that kind of come along and say, look, I mean, we need to take a different look at this through a different lens of, hey, does it make sense to just go buy this thing or partner our way through it? Instead of always creating everything ourselves. So it is a smart strategic decision.
Our CTO and our head of engineering and are often remind me of the tech debt that we accumulate from things that we have built and have to maintain in that regard. So.
Yeah. So could you describe some of the cutting edge bioinformatics tools or novel algorithms that your team has developed, and how have they led to actionable insights?
Yeah, I was reflecting on that question coming into here. A lot of what we do is simple stuff, but applied in maybe different ways or meaningful ways. And practical examples, what I mean by that is so the data asset we have access to is 4 million subjects, is like 11 years of history, and then, as I said, 250,000 whole genomes. So they're just massive quantities of data, and that in and of itself doesn't solve anybody's problem, right? It's like, yes, it's a resource. I often liken it to a mine or something, or maybe even it's a hole in the ground. We got to go. There's insights and useful resources in there, but how do you dig that out in an efficient fashion? How do you serve it up to the customers you're working with in a way that they can ingest? And so, just over our history, some of the things, and they're not going to sound groundbreaking, but I think like very useful milestones or turning points. It's certainly moving to a cloud-based orientation about 5 or 6 years ago, where we were able to serve up data in much more flexible ways, and being able to grant access to data sets, particularly as resources like GCP and AWS were coming to full fruition. Also, just the freedom and the flexibility to develop on top of those resources. It was a big part of one of our earlier iterations that makes it easier to show and tell the data when in that format, certainly compared to behind the scenes. More recently, it's some of the product innovations that we've been working on that I think are most key to that. And so, again, it's probably not algorithms per se, but like, all right, you've got this massive data layer. Is somebody going to pay you for the whole data layer? Well, if they do, they're only going to pay you a little bit, because there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that's not all that useful. So how do you start to cut it up into useful products? And so building a modular architecture ecosystem where there's an initial layer of clinical data that's useful for a lot of applications, but is also generalizable across a large number of populations. And then on top of that, starting to build in different enhancements or attachments, data products, and kind of the parlance that we've adopted internally, but starting to get to more specific and more specialized resources, but only where it's relevant. So rather than trying to extract, I don't know, like cardiovascular measurements across the entire cohort where they don't really exist, going and pulling it for all the subjects that have heart disease, and like making those resources available in fashion. So it's that architecture that then kind of, say, flexibility and modularity and reusability was a big part of what we've been trying to accomplish over the past few years. There's an ever proliferating number of data sources, and in listening to our customers, some of those principles are becoming top of their buying considerations as well. Can this thing be reused multiple times as opposed to like a one-time highly customized resource? It's also beneficial for us to have some of that in, that these highly customized resources are hard to build, and if everything is customer bespoke, it only gets used once, whereas that kind of that modular flexible architecture that I hinted at is easier for us to produce and maintain as well. So
yeah, I mean, well, it kind of speaks to the overall shift that you made in terms of the project manager and to consultants as well. But what sort of comes to mind for me as well, after talking to some of the vendors like Olink or SomaLogic, or even Illumina, right? They essentially are like, look, you can get all of this data, but the reality is, if you're going to pay for this amount, then here's your smaller fee. But by the way, we're going to go collect that broader data set and leverage your data. And I think it's kind of it's always an interesting conversation as well. Whenever you're on the receiving side of, I would say, of the message of, hey, look, here's a segmented price for the segment that you're wanting, but also the fact that we're going to see a lot more, and it may or may not contribute to what you're researching. It's your choice whether or not, if you want to pay for that additional result or not.
Yeah, as a perfect illustration of something we're thinking through right now with all that whole genome data, what are the applications that actually require knowing all 3 billion base pairs out of a given individual, versus, well, I'm actually interested in just kind of point samples or a few places. And I'm thinking like Invitae on the diagnostic side was an example of a company that really developed a model that was able to filter down to information content. We're trying to think through some of those same principles for us, that not everybody needs a whole genome for the specific R&D applications. How do we cut it up and serve it in a way that's useful? And yes, we've generated in the background, but better matching value to the problem we're solving, as opposed to saying we got a whole genome, we're gonna give it to you whether you want it or not.
Yeah, absolutely critical. And I mean, I commend you too, in terms of thinking of all the different ways that you can approach it, because you never know as well. I mean, researchers, right? I mean, they like to sort of, plow a wide path and then sort of think narrowly about, what is the result that I'm actually looking for. But
Yeah.
they also get very enamored, I would say, by the, watching the broader sets of data. And so it's like, well, what do you really need to produce the result that you're looking for?
Yeah. Yep. And again, it goes back to that customer orientation. How do we help you solve your problem? Not trying to push a particular data set or particular piece of technology on you. Like we have to listen to what you're facing and tailor the solution to whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as CEO, what's been your most rewarding or surprising lesson about leadership and innovation that you've encountered in life sciences?
You know, I the maybe the most surprising thing, and again, it sounds obvious in stating it, but still, it was a lesson to learn. Is like you have to tell people what you're trying to do and bring them along, whether it's internally or externally. You can't just assume they're going to get it, and especially in a we're a virtual company at this point. We've got people scattered everywhere, so it's a lot of interactions through this kind of medium, a webcam and a screen, which puts an even more of a premium on communication and explaining exactly what you're trying to do, and especially if you're trying to do something different or change course. Um, Really helping telling a story really about it. And a friend of mine actually quoted this a couple of weeks ago to me, like facts tell, stories sell. Critically important in leadership, and especially coming from a scientific background, it's quite comfortable for me to default back to the facts, right? It's like these are the numbers, this is what the result says, but without putting it in context, without wrapping it in a story, a lot of people, those facts are just going to bounce off of them. So like putting it in a way that people can receive that information, digest it, and then act on it. And I'd say that's probably been maybe the most important leadership lesson of the past 8 years now that I've been leading NashBio. You got to bring people along with you. You can't just assume they're not just gonna to get it by assimilation or just by watching you. You got to tell them what you want them to do, and as I say, providing that context behind it is critical to doing that.
I would say I mean, it ties to how we make sales decisions as well, which was a real mystery to me as an entrepreneur. It was sort of, hey, look, I'm going to use my logical brain. I'm going to tell a logical story that based on that logic, people are going to buy.
Yeah,
And then time after time, people would essentially leave the conversation and not buy. But the minute that I start to tell the story, right, all of a sudden, more and more people come along. They buy, based on the emotion that they feel or that they think they're going to feel based on the outcome that they're going to get. And
yeah.
I find that, just fascinating as well, because I originally believed that we made more decisions with our logical brain than with the emotional side of our brain, but doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, and not to speak ill of my colleagues at Vanderbilt, but the precursor to NashBio, that was one of their frustrations, is that folks wouldn't they'd be out explaining the resource to potential users, and they wouldn't get it on the first try. And that, I suspect that's because it had a very heavy science focus, or exactly that, appealing to the logical brain. And that's where, if you can't, you have to illustrate it in a way that for your audience to receive, in order for them to actually act upon it. So it's, again, it sounds simple, sounds straightforward, but like so often missed, and if not done well, is a big pitfall.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's the greatest piece of leadership advice that you've received?
Oof, well, throw money at the problem. No, it was that was actually when I have identical twins, and when they were first born, that was the advice given at that point. But no, I again, that leadership advice, are really like figuring out who your audience is and how to bring them along. I think I don't want to belabor that one too much, but I really do think that's, as my own leadership style has evolved, understanding who you're talking to and tailoring your message exactly to that, which I know your background on the marketing side is probably something you preach, and I've come to embrace it.
Yeah,
Got
absolutely.
to speak to your audience.
Absolutely. What inspires you?
Oof, is it probably been another evolution over time, but I do find it inspiring, especially as you start to move into leadership roles, of letting go of whatever you're working on and seeing what comes out as you start to fuse input from multiple people. Um, and going back to that PhD background, there's a real ownership that comes about from that particular training, right? This is my thesis. I'm going to shoulder this burden for 5 years, and this is mine. And then early work as an individual contributor, again, kind of that real sense of ownership. Then as you start to move up, if you maintain that, that it has to be done my way, that's the only way. Nobody wants to work with you, but you miss out on a lot of opportunities, right? And I've seen this both in my consulting life and then in running NashBio, that if you're able to start letting go of stuff and bringing the input and talents from multiple people, you end up in all kinds of interesting and surprising places, and certainly things that I would not have been able to create by myself. So just learning to let go, figuring out when I need to intervene and weigh in, but not expecting that everything's going to come from my hands, and seeing the output of the whole team at NashBio is one of those direct examples. And again, just how a group of people can come together like that, I find that particularly inspiring.
This point, I think, is so important because a couple weeks ago, I had a conversation with somebody on one of the teams that I lead, and I just had said something similar where we were in the midst of a conversation about how to get something done. And at the end of the day, they wanted to know like how exactly I would go do it. And I said, but hang on a second. We hired you for a very specific reason. There's a
Yeah.
reason why you're here. And I mean, I want to hear how you would go do it. I don't,
Right.
if everything's got to be done my way, I may as well either do it myself or, figure out a way to get automation to do it, because I automate a ton of stuff anyway.
Yeah.
And I mean, then I don't need people at all. But if I want brains, right, and I want people to think on their own and think on their feet, you've got to turn over a little bit of that responsibility as well, and just say, hey, look, I'll give you the freedom to fail. That's fine. But I mean, I also want you to at least try.
Yeah, I didn't hire you to be a mini version of me, right? Just leverage is not it, right? I hired you because of the value, whatever you're bringing to the table, and ultimately the combination of our two brains is going to produce something better than mine alone, or you trying to replicate mine.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. What concerns you?
I thought a bit about that question coming in, and certainly the overall, I'll say the overall turn away from science that appears apparent in our country right now, is something that definitely concerns me. Obviously, I'm a product of that system, right? I went to a major research university. I spent a number of years in that environment. My wife is an academic as well, so kind of firsthand observation. But stepping back from those details, if you look at what the U.S. scientific enterprise has produced over the past 80 years, is incredible. It has transformed the world in so many different ways across biotech and physics and computer science. And I mean, there's no way to say it other than it seems like there's a whole scale assault on the scientific enterprise in this country right now. The disruption to funding, the disdain for expertise, these are things that I don't think us serve us all that well in certainly the near term and long term future of the country. And so that does concern me. It's certainly at the administration has made their priorities clear, but it's also filtered down into parts of the population where there's just a distrust of science. Right? This is not a healthy sentiment that has come about. And so on all of us in the innovation ecosystem, whether attached directly to the basic sciences or elsewhere, to articulate the value like this. Your cell phone came about because XYZ investments that were made 50 years ago. These drugs came about because of XYZ investments made 20, 30 years ago, and we all have a better life and more productive economy for it. And so I'm quite concerned about where some of these themes are taking us, and how we can do a better job sharing the value of some of these things that we're producing on the innovation ecosystem. If we don't, and some of these trends continue, it worries me about what the long-term trajectory of the country is.
Yeah, I share that sentiment. I mean, I very much do. I have said, for a long time now that I have there are things that we will see that will ripple now, but they're the long-term effects you're not going to know for possibly a decade. And when we turn around in a decade and go, well, where was all the innovation? Why do we have all these people either dying or sick or whatever? Yeah, it's a real unfortunate situation that we're currently living through. But I also think broadly it's on our it's all of our responsibility to sort of say, look, I know that that's not reality, so I need to try and help reorient things as well and take some responsibility too. So
well, it goes back to the point I made earlier, right? Is like you have to speak to your audience, and so find like this is probably where a fact-based approach doesn't doesn't land in that regard, right? Is like showing and making it real for somebody of like, this is what those R&D dollars did 20, 30 years ago. And again, think of how much better we are, how much more productive the economy is, and how much wealthier we are as a country because of those investments. So I have to
Yeah, absolutely.
moderate the message, or modulate the
Yep.
message, I guess.
Last question. What excites you?
It'll sound very consulting-y as well, but I still get a kick out of it's now a virtual whiteboard room, but like getting together with a group of people and trying to crack open a hard problem. The thrill of the whiteboard marker, the the virtual whiteboard marker at this point, but like going back to some of those things that appealed to me about the consulting experience at McKinsey, like taking something amorphous and complex and breaking it down into manageable pieces, and that satisfaction that comes at the end of like, all right, we figured something out here. This is a new way of thinking about this. This is a new product idea that we could bring forward. There's a new service model. It's some way how it's a generalizable approach to solving any manner of problems, and I still get a thrill out of that, when kind of that satisfaction at the end, when okay, we've done something here. We've made a difference, or we've made a plan. Let's go test it now and come back. So that's been it's been a through line throughout my career now for 20 plus years, and continues to motivate me to get out of bed. Hanging out with my kids is also an exciting thing as well. I'm taking them camping this weekend, so quite excited about spending some time up in the Colorado mountains with them. And so again, taking some downtime as well, a big part of that balance. I often find when I'm trying to think through particularly some of those complex problems, like stepping back from whatever I am doing at hand and going and doing something else is when some of my best thinking comes about. So building in some of those breaks and time for like less structured thought has been an important evolution in my professional toolkit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. And Leland, thank you for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here and for sharing with us the journey that you've been on with NashBio. I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much for having me, Don. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.